welcome everyone here and everyone who's watching. And I'm assuming that people may not understand why our city council has expanded to this to this size, or while we're all sitting in the Kumbaya circle. But in fact, this is a meeting of the Eugene City Council and the Eugene Planning Commission. So I'm going to open the Eugene City Council meeting, and then Heidi's going to open the Planning Commission meeting. And there we are, and then we're going to head right around and have people introduce themselves and end up at some point with Sarah. So why don't we, go for it.
I'm Carolyn Weiss, and I am the Long Range Planning Manager. Gardner, Planning Director.
Randy Ledick, member of the Planning Commission. Jeff Mills, member of the Planning Commission.
Kay Byerly, Planning Commission.
George Brown, City Councilor, Ward 1.
Alan Lincoln, City Council. Rick Duncan, Eugene Planning Commission.
Kitty Piercy, Mayor of Eugene.
Emily Jerome, Deputy City Attorney.
John Belcher, Planning Commission.
Pat Barr, City Council, Bethel, Ward 6.
George Bowling, City Council, Ward 4.
Betty Taylor, Ward 2 Councilor, and I don't know why we're sitting in a circle.
Because you wanted it, Betty.
I'm Mike Clark, City Council, Ward 5, North Central.
John Reese, City Manager.
Chris Pryor, City Council, Ward 8, Southwest.
Bill Randall, Planning Commission.
Terry Harding, City Planning Staff. Alyssa Hanson with City Planning Division. I'm Sarah Mederi, Assistant City Manager and also the Interim Planning and Development Director. And I'm going to help kind of facilitate today's meeting. So it's a pretty exciting day for us. We've been meeting the second of 3 joint work sessions between the Planning Commission and the City Council. And today is the first time we're going to jump into the draft plan. We've had a number of meetings with the City Council where we've talked about Envision Eugene through the lens of the triple bottom line. But today is really understanding the issues that led up to the work that came into this. And as you know, this is a lot of work from the CRG members, and we have a number of those in the audience today, and other community members, staff, public input. So the way that today's going to work is we're going to start going through pillar by pillar, and we'll lead a discussion as we can kind of go through this. But before we get started, I'm going to allow John to say a couple of words, and we'll dive in.
Thank you for being here and engaging in this conversation. Several of you have been part of the CRG, so be so free to sort of weigh in from that perspective also as we go through the conversation. And we're not asking for any decisions by either body, the work session now or the work session next one coming up. What we're still doing is gathering information, wanting to be able to answer questions, and then eventually I will be coming back with what I would propose as a final recommendation after getting all the input. You might remember as we're moving towards the date of February and March that not all of the information or all the, we won't be asking you to make all the decisions at that time. There are still a couple of outstanding pieces that you won't be responding to in your meeting in March. This is for the City Council. I do have an expectation that I'll be coming to you with commercial, multifamily, economic development, land, single-family residential land. You will not be asked in your meeting in March to plan on the space for that. We'll be coming back with some recommendations about housing mix, that's multifamily and single-family mix of housing. So we'll be asking you to take a look at that also. Subsequent to the meeting in March, there'll be some additional work on actual UGV. That's what the council wants to go. So just to kind of keep prepping on what we're moving towards. The document that you have before us, a lot of work has gone into that of the CRG. Not all CRG members probably would agree or support every item that's in the document. But I do think it's fair to say that overall in the CRG there was substantial support for what you see in the document. So that maybe sets the stage.
Carolyn's going to start us off with our...
Okay, so I'm going to be referring to the document that you have, the proposal. It's in your packet. It's also on your chairs, and for some reason you still don't have a copy, so we have additional in the central table here. And we're going to start actually on page 6. And this is the pillar titled Promote Compact Urban Development and Efficient Transportation Options. So we also have it up here. I'm just going to take some time and walk us through the strategies and the tactics. And then we can open it up to questions. So make sure we're all settled here. So, in general, what we're trying to accomplish with this pillar, promoting compact urban development and efficient transportation options, is using our land inside the urban growth boundaries more efficiently, and through development of vacant land and through redevelopment of currently underutilized land. We're also looking at placing that redevelopment in places where we have good transportation options. And when we say transportation options, we mean not just for car, but also for high-capacity transit or bicycles and pedestrians as well. And so by doing this, we not only kind of make better use of our land inside the urban growth boundary, but we can foster vibrant mixed-use neighborhoods while we're doing that. The way that we anticipate accomplishing this goal is through overcoming current regulatory and financial barriers to this kind of development. This is actually not a new goal for the city of Eugene. We've had a nodal development program for a long time. We've had a mixed-use center program for a long time. This is really building on those earlier programs, and we think making them better by learning from kind of what we've done in the past. So I would say that this represents more of a focus on implementation and overcoming some of those barriers that we currently have, and being kind of realistic about what it takes to have redevelopment occur in our community. In general, I would say that this pillar has very strong support from both the community resource group and general community. We've heard it talked about as a way to increase density in our city while we protect the livability of our neighborhoods in some of the areas that have maybe suffered from some ill-conceived density in the past. So we have a lot of support for the overall concept. There are some questions about some of the strategies that I'll kind of touch on as we go forward. So looking at the first strategy, that is really kind of the over-encompassing strategy for the whole pillar. And it is to meet all of our 20-year multifamily housing and commercial land needs within the existing urban growth boundaries through development of vacant lands and focusing new development and redevelopment in our core commercial areas, corridor areas, and downtown. So we're really talking about two different kinds of land needs here. We're talking about land for multifamily, and we're talking about land for commercial development. And what we're saying with the strategy is that we believe we can meet both of those needs within our current urban growth boundaries. We have done some analysis and some data collection to look at what these redevelopment rates would need to look like in order to accomplish this goal. We're still actually completing that work. I can tell you that preliminarily it looks like with some incentives, we believe that the multifamily can happen in our core areas, such as Walnut Station and South Willamette and our downtown area, that we're quite confident that we can accommodate that multifamily land need. We're also looking at that commercial land need, and it's going to be a tougher reach for commercial lands because we have a higher need for those lands. And we're still working on exactly what that redevelopment rate would need to look like. But we think that with some aggressive strategies, we can also meet that land need inside our urban growth boundary. So I just wanted to refer to this map for a moment because this kind of shows the areas that we're talking about when we refer to core commercial areas, corridors, and downtown. The corridors are, I know it's a little hard to see for you all, but the orange areas represent the corridor areas. And those areas we actually brought to Council and the Planning Commission a couple months ago when we first started talking about this goal. And some of the feedback that we received at that time was, are we being a little too restrictive where we're planning for this redevelopment activity to occur? And so what we're showing here is that we've expanded our focus not just to be on those corridors, but we have some kind of reddish maroon areas that are also highlighted, and those are our core commercial designated areas. So what we're saying is we believe that a fair amount of redevelopment activity can happen in those areas as well as in the corridors. So those are kind of the areas that we're focusing on. I just wanted to bring your attention to that. Another tactic that we're proposing underneath this strategy is looking at some of the code as it relates to industrial and commercially zoned land and providing for more flexibility of uses in those areas. So a good example of this is looking at West 11th, where we have some industrial zone properties intermixed with some commercial zone properties. And right now there's some fairly restrictive code language that does not allow much flexibility of the uses of those areas. And so we're re-looking at that and seeing if we can generalize some of that content so that we still have compatibility in those areas, but we have more flexibility of what can occur and make better use of those lands that currently exist.
You want people to comment after each item on here, or wait till you do the whole pillar?
It's really up to what people want to do. I'm happy to take questions.
Do I pause after this number one and see if anybody has anything?
Sounds like a good idea. Okay. So the only other thing that I would say about this first strategy is that we're not precluding multifamily or commercial land from existing within an expansion area should an expansion area occur. So if for industrial uses or for single family we do expand urban growth boundaries, we don't want to preclude some commercial from being in that area. What we are saying with the strategy is we don't want it to be the impetus of the UGB expansion. So I think with that clarification, your comments or questions?
You want to take it?
All right, so we have, I'm going to just go ahead and keep the cues. So George, Brown, Heather, I'll just kind of keep watching after you're ready.
I've got a question. In the middle of the page it says, there's a bullet point, it says, actually it's under number 2, it says, identify focus areas that are ready for change, economically viable, and poised for success. What does that mean? How do you identify an area like that?
Why don't we wait until we get to that next section, George, if you don't mind?
We're going to do on the first.
There is one.
Okay. All right. Okay.
First, with Q and number 2.
Okay, so we have.
I'm happy to sort of hear a little bit of a change and also the map, because during the CRG we heard quite a bit from some of the folks up in the Santa Clara area that talked about how their 20-minute neighborhood really revolves around a lot of the commercial area that's up there just above Beltline and so on. So for them, their core area was really sort of that hub up there, and I think it was Jerry Finnegan that even suggested that about the only reason he ever came downtown was for the CRG meeting. So, I think it's real important that this map shows that sort of change, which I'm happy. And you clarified, because I had underlined the word meet all, because I hope that if we do go outside the UGB, that we recognize depending on where we go, there may be demand for at least some supporting commercial and multifamily to sort of fit the whole scheme of this strategy. So happy to see that little bit of change.
And I just wanted to weigh in on the idea of grouping the denser development along those corridors that I really struggle with. The idea of the overall planning that we're doing, keep that denser development along those corridors.
Just to get some idea of the comparative
doing is coming back to in our next meeting when we're talking about economic development, having a little bit more information about acreages and redevelopment things like that.
Then confirm for me that our initial initial ECLA determination was that we were deficient 480 acres commercial.
388.
388? Okay.
Okay, we have John in the queue, and then if there's no other, John and Alan, and then we'll form the next.
As a person who makes maps, I think the thing that I've learned is when you identify areas that you want to develop, you de facto identify areas you don't want to develop. And I'm not sure that's the intention of this map, but it's an unintended consequence whenever you highlight an area, you are darkening another area, as it were. It's my perception that we're very good at making plans and deciding where we want to go. Where we fall down is finding a development community that wants to do that. So the combination of those two is be very careful how much you highlight where you want to be, because unintentionally and maybe not really, but what you end up doing is reducing the number of opportunities to actually make those things happen. So I'm glad to see there's more space open there, but I really like to send out the message that if you've got a project that meets our needs and it's along a corridor and if it's not maroon, you still ought to be talking to us.
And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the filler on livability and opportunity siting.
So the maroon and yellow, can you identify those? I can't see that small print.
Oh, what they say?
Yeah, in the legend.
So the maroon are core commercial areas. The yellow are corridors. And we actually have another red, which are other commercial areas, which are other areas that are currently designated for commercial. They're maybe a little smaller, or not quite so centrally located to the core, but we did actually, for the reasons that Commissioner Belcher just mentioned, we did want to leave them on the map, and they have opportunities
Right.
as well.
Right. I agree. I think that the concept of using the existing commercial core areas and the corridors and the downtown in particular are the right places to focus this attention. Do we get into we have a lot of industrial land that is some of it that is 1-2 acre parcels don't really work for industrial lands. Is that what you were getting at in code flexibility, or actually thinking about changing the zoning of some of those 1 and 2 acre industrials to commercial?
We're actually looking at both. And when we actually do talk about economic development, we do have a tactic under there that talks about rezoning some of those properties. But in addition to some rezoning, actually changing the code to allow more flexibility as well.
Any sense of the number and amount of industrial land that might be rezoned commercial?
I think we're looking at a range of 100 to 200 acres.
In various sizes that would come
Yes.
cumulatively, you meant that. What was that number again? Sorry.
1 to 200 acres.
We'll get into that one more next week.
Yeah.
Carolyn, why don't you keep going? Okay.
All right, so
Strategy 2 really kind of builds on the first strategy. In addition to just looking at redevelopment opportunities, we want to transform these areas into mixed-use neighborhoods where they foster active, walkable community living by providing a mix of residential, commercial, retail, and public uses that are all in close proximity to one another. When we talk about mixed use, we actually talked a lot with the community resource group about that term, and I think it means two different things to people. So it means mixed use neighborhood where you would have all those different uses, but not necessarily in the same building, but in close proximity to one another. So you could have an office building and then an apartment building and some retail stores, all in close proximity, and we call that a mixed use neighborhood. A mixed-use building is where you would find those uses within one structure. So maybe there'd be retail on the ground floor, housing that
desired kind of outgrowth of this, and so we want to look at ways to encourage that to happen as well. So, we're talking about doing area plans for some of these different areas to really integrate all of those different uses, including not just the land use, but transportation, parking, parks and open space, the overall kind of urban form or pedestrian environment. Because we recognize that all of these areas have a different character, and we don't just want to take a cookie-cutter approach to planning for them. We want to look at their unique attributes and plan accordingly. So when we talk about, we have kind of a sub-bullet under there, identify focus areas that are ready for change, economically viable, and poised for success. Really, I think what we're talking about there is that we want to look at hot spots where maybe there is already some momentum occurring, where we already are seeing maybe some land begin to redevelop, where people are beginning to do some walking and shopping, and where we can kind of help that area turn the corner. What we don't want to do is spend a lot of time and resources in areas that just for economic reasons are not poised to redevelop. So we really kind of want to focus our efforts where we think will bear the most fruit.
So for an example of that might be, I know there's some work going on and around the land between 24th and 29th. There's already activity that's going on. People are redeveloping some of that area. So I think part of this attempt is to identify an area like that and help create some of these area unique that could help with redevelopment of those areas in ways that create the economic development activity at the same time transitioning or protecting the neighborhood. So that would be an example of that kind of area.
So any questions about that strategy before I move on?
I know that George has a lot of questions hung over how to answer this.
That kind of answered it, but I still don't understand how you say it's going to be like ready for change. I mean, how you, that seems so subjective to me. It seems like developers and the entrepreneurs are the ones that decide that rather than the city. It just seems kind of, that bullet seems, I mean, it's a, I guess, thing you want to do, but it just seems so subjective as to be like, I'm not sure that really doesn't mean much to me when I read that there. That's all.
Is there a measure for that?
Well, we can certainly look at market analysis, and that can tell us what areas are most poised for being economically feasible to redevelop. And so that is one thing that we can use. I think the other thing that we're trying to focus on is actually partnering with property owners and developers, and not just trying to kind of imagine what might look good somewhere, but finding out what people's plans are for their properties and kind of working with them to try to make that change happen. I'm wondering if there's allowance in this for looking at the streetscape or the street design, because you talk, I mean, I don't know if that falls under public uses, but you talk a lot about buildings and mixed-use neighborhoods, but maybe the thing that needs help is actually the walking environment. I think when we say transportation, we probably include all that in there, but we can be more explicit about that.
Councilor Lincoln?
I suspect that identify focus areas that are ready for change has both a push and a pull component to it, that you'll be looking at what people are doing and then trying to foster that, but also focusing people and saying, this will be an area by changing policies or incentives and saying this is an area that we could push to have development occur. So the question I had really was about what does create area plan mean? I know what a refinement plan is. I don't know, what did you have in mind?
Well, we're not necessarily designating a tool for each one of these sites because it may vary. And so doing area planning kind of as a verb is a way for us to kind of look at these different issues and then decide what the best
mechanism is, whether it's a refinement plan or maybe it's an overlay zone or a form-based code or surface what. And we intentionally didn't identify the specific tool, but talked more about the opportunities and the outcomes.
So it'd be more customized, depending on where you are and what the circumstances are. I like that idea.
Yeah, kind of expanding on what Councilor Zelenko's question was about the concept of what the area plan is. And I'm recalling my read, one of my reads of this where there is a talk about creating a neighborhood plans. And there's a time frame for doing that. But this is not that, if that's a question. This is different than that. So this is a new mechanism that we're not fully defined on yet. But it would contain, part of the effort would generate an identification of these focus areas or hotspots in the plan. Is that the intent?
Yes.
I mean, I'm seeing a sub-bullet to create the plan, and the sub-bullet says create focus areas or identify close focus areas. Excuse me.
Let me see if what I heard was, are we going to identify all these hotspots first and then do something, a plan for each one of those? Is that
what I'm saying that under 2, the major bullet says create area plans.
right?
Okay. And so under that area plan, the 2 elements I see that are specifically identified here is identify focus areas.
Right.
So that would be, I presume, one of the thrusts or major thrusts of the plan. I'm not quite sure how recognize unique character, because that's how you would structure and identify and characterize the area you're talking about within the same plan. But I guess I'm just trying to understand the intent of what the plan is actually trying to accomplish. If you're going to go through an effort, you're going to create a group, you're going to create a plan. In that plan, you're going to have this, this, and this with the intent of achieving some goals.
Yeah.
And the goals that I see here are identify focus areas.
So, I actually think I read it a little bit.
Okay.
So, the way that I read that is that we will create area plans, and that we'll choose where we spend our resources on developing those area plans by looking at areas that are ready for change, and then by recognizing the unique characteristics of those areas. I think the goal of the actual area plan is to provide integration that's actually listed in that first bullet, to integrate land use, transportation, parking, parks, and open space and urban design. So that would really be the outcome, and those other 2 are kind of considerations.
But as a follow-up, just to make sure I understand, so the focus would be the lens applied to determine where an area plan is needed?
That's all, yeah.
Just maybe just clarifying a little bit, but just to piggyback on Carolyn, so how I would see it is that we'd say, okay, let's area X or location X and location Y currently are poised for success, have economic viability going on right now. There's something going on right now from a business perspective, economic development or commercial area X and Y. Then we say, okay, let's develop a plan for X and an area plan for Y. And each of those plans could be an overlay, it could be a refinement, whatever the right term is for that. Each of those plans are going to consider the land use, transportation, parking, parks, etc. within that particular area. Understood. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Duncan.
Maybe as a couple of examples, and I have some concern when we start talking about formulating plans, because we've done a lot of that and it's quite time consuming and costly, and I'm afraid we sort of get behind the process. An example would be Oakway Center. That when that initiated redevelopment, it caused a lot of quick development right along Coburg Road. That's really intensified a lot of the commercial use there. I think another example would have been 29th Willamette that we went into the economic slide. There was a lot of projects planned up there for redevelopment that have just been sort of halted because of the economy. My concern gets to be is if we get behind everything, if we're not careful, we can slow the process down. So we're going to have to be kind of quick. I would suggest the university and all the money that the university is spending is sort of fostering redevelopment along the Franklin corridor, particularly done. So,
I think you're particularly talking about Oakway as an example that illustrates really why we have this range of types of tools that you might look at. So in one area, there very well may be a need to do a refinement plan or a depth planning process. In others, it could just be having the business owners who are interested in a project letting us know what barriers there are to getting things done, and it might be a quicker fix that we can do to help provide some flexibility in the code or do something. So it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of a full meal deal, one-size-fits-all process. It's very much tailored.
right, and in that situation, it would have been, we would have come in, I think, quicker with a transportation plan for that area. We wouldn't have had sort of the problems that have been created with all the traffic along Coburg, because that element wasn't there when all that started and took place.
Councilor Taylor?
John mentioned a hot spot. Did you say between 24th and 29th of 11 is one of the hot spots?
It's one of the areas that's currently,
When they were talking about hot spots. And so I wonder, what are you going to do? Actually, that seems pretty busy to me, but it's an area where I am a lot of times. But what are you going to do then to a hot spot? Are you going to go to every business and say, what are your plans? Are you planning to leave? Or what do you plan to do? How would you get in touch with them?
Well, I can tell you what we're currently doing right now, because we are doing a pilot project in that area right now, and we're working with the Friendly Area Neighbors and the Southtown Business Association, which is a consortium.
I know about that.
Yeah, so those two have really partnered up with us on this project, and it's been really helpful because we have business associations that is helping us reach out to business owners. We have had several meetings that were specifically geared towards business owners to meet them, and I think that we have a mailing proposed in the near future. So we are kind of doing direct outreach activities to folks along the area, figuring out what their concerns are, what their best outcomes would be for the area, and doing then the same thing with the neighbors and the residents in the area as well.
Well, I met with the Southtown business people, and I thought their purpose was to increase, to grow their business, and to make people aware of them. But you're talking about redeveloping.
I wonder if we could hold this question. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about this in the next pillar when we talk about opportunity siting, so maybe we can get into a little bit more depth under that pillar.
I just wonder what you're going to do with those.
That was our last, so if there are any more questions on this one, or can we move into 3?
All right. Number 3 is the strategy aimed at really creating a transition zone between these core commercial areas and corridors and the single-family neighborhoods that may exist around them. An example of this would be the work that we did over in Walnut Station, where we had single-family neighborhoods that were directly adjacent to some commercially zoned property and property owned by the University of Oregon. We spent a lot of time looking at how that interface would occur. And so we not only designated kind of where the transition would occur, but what it would look like. And so the same type of thing could happen along some of these corridors where it was deemed necessary, where we could have, through opportunity siting actually, so we'll be talking a lot about opportunity siting, or another area planning process to kind of define where those transitions would occur, what they would look like. But the point of them is really to protect those single-family neighborhoods from the flexibility that we want to increase along our core commercial corridors. At the same time, those areas are really an opportunity to provide different housing options. So there are current housing types that we don't have much of in Eugene. They're the attached single-family housing, like row houses and clustered housing. And those types of housing may fit well into a transition area because they're compatible with single family and they can just act as a natural transition. So that's an idea for what can happen in those areas. And I think that's about all I had to say about that.
Yeah, I think this particular strategy creating transition areas is really important because it will help us define ambiguity that exists in our current growth management policies. Over the past several years, issues have come to both the Planning Commission and the City Council from neighborhoods in the River Road, Santa Clara area, around the university, Jefferson West Side, even the South Hills, about how density is impacting existing neighborhoods. And I would hope that by continuing the initiatives we have with the Oakville compatibility studies and also moving forward with our opportunity siting process further, that we'll have some real opportunities to correct some issues that we've been dealing with for many years that we should overcome.
Yes, Commissioner Belcher?
I was just going to bring, this is an not totally resolved issue, because I know in the CRG some of the neighborhood leaders have said, well, you're talking about a transition zone between commercial and residential. In reality, it's either going to be in the commercial or the residential or both, and we need to, at some point in time, resolve which that is. I just wanted to bring that issue to the table since it's mentioned.
Any additional questions on this, Commissioner Mills?
Not really a question, it's a comment relating to utilizing opportunity siting to achieve this. A lot of great work has been done around opportunity siting. I think it's a very promising tool. But my sense is it's not that any tool is ever fully and completely developed, but there's a fair amount of work I think that has to be done yet to fully define what opportunity siting is and how it's going to work and what kind of tools it's going to utilize to achieve it. And so just to comment that this bullet seems to imply like this is a fully developed, utilized, proven tool, and I would offer that. I'm not sure it's not there yet. I think it's got great promise, and I think we should definitely include it in the plan, but I think this is a little bit somewhat misleading in the way it's stated.
Other comments?
Help me understand. I was listening to Commissioner Luddick's remarks there, and I'm very interested in that. For example, how would this work in an area like some of the conflicts that existed in the 19th and Boulder area? How would this look? How would it change the realities on the ground there and make for a better situation?
Sarah, do you want to answer that? Well, as Commissioner Belcher mentioned, a transition area could occur within residentially zoned land or commercially zoned land. In the case of 19th Avenue, that's a high-density residential zone, and the compatibility standards that were adopted established, in effect, a transition by lowering height limits allowed in that residential area. So that's a site-specific example of one way a transition tool could be developed. I think it's an example that we can learn from, but in the bullet it says recognize the unique characteristics of each area, so it wouldn't necessarily be replicated in other examples.
As well, that was a unique area. I think it was the only place in the city where R4 and R1 smashed up against each other.
So, if to take that one step farther, it could be the case in several of instances where we're taking something that is currently planned to be of much higher density and changing it to something of lower density.
Well, the adopted amendment on 19th didn't change allowable densities, and we made findings that we weren't reducing allowable density through those compatibility standards adoption. Instead, what we're doing is regulating the height and bulk of the buildings to establish the compatibility that was necessary in that location.
Okay.
Councilor Ford?
That's fine, Councilor Zelensky.
Any other additional comments on this?
I guess I just want to clarify the answer, because you asked will it be time to actually decrease the amount of density, right?
Yeah.
And you used 19th Alder as an example.
And if I could, I think it decreased what was planned by the developer based on what was the existing code or existing zoning. They had planned to do something that would have created greater capacity in that place. But so the practical reality, we can make findings that we didn't change density, but the practical reality was we changed the number of people that were likely to live there. So in fact, we did change the density.
transitions tend to be more stark than more gradual. If there's a small commercial thing across the street from your house, you don't see that as a very great transition. That's pretty stark. So it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder as well. But we did end up doing that. I mean, one of the things that we realized in that section in the Suna neighborhood was that you could fit the entire city cottage grove in that 9-block area if you maxed out complete density right next to an R1, and that's just supposed to work, which is why we changed it. But I do like the idea of having areas where you can do transition zones, and I like what we did in Suna and we did in the Fairmont neighborhood where we had transition heights away from the residential neighborhoods into the commercial or institutional areas. That makes a lot of sense to me, and it eases people's angst about the development and the livability of their neighborhoods, especially when you're smashing into neighborhoods, because we're trying to create these livable, walkable 20-minute neighborhoods, and those issues are going to come up. And Walnut Station, another example, where the heights actually, we use that again, so we've got starting to see a pattern here. Transitioning the heights away from the residential neighborhood into these more high-dense areas. I think that's a graceful way to do it.
Yeah, just to underscore Councilor Slanka's point, that's where we have been heading with more, some don't want to go too far and say design review, but form-based code. Right. The way things look, how they impact the neighborhoods, and Councilor Brown's comment earlier, what we're heading towards with opportunity siting is an opportunity for developers to identify the next hot spots or potential areas for higher density development, but counterbalance that with neighborhood involvement so that the many things that we've been hearing about, infringement upon privacy and everything else that kind of takes the badness of higher density, can get resolved in kind of a collaborative manner. That's where opportunity siting is headed, and I hope we get to that in the next few months.
Right. And taking your Rick's comment that we don't want to get behind it so that we're slowing it down. We want to be pushing it or leading it.
This is a little fuzzy, but I would hope that we would look at the difference between what we can do and what we're likely to do. And we might shorten the range of possibilities and have more likelihood available. And if that's where we end up, I think we're in a better place.
Next strategy. Okay, we're on number 4. This one is to make compact urban development in core commercial areas and corridors easy. And simply put, I think this strategy is kind of the cornerstone of this pillar, because if we want to see this kind of redevelopment activity we're talking about to address our multi-family and commercial needs, we need to overcome the barriers that exist, and we need to make this easier to happen. So some of our tactics include removing regulatory barriers, and we have some samples listed out, like reducing parking requirements. Currently have a ground floor commercial requirement that has been an obstacle to some buildings going in, and so looking at it, removing that. Looking at traffic impact analysis requirements. And that doesn't, I want to just clarify, it doesn't mean that we just do away with all traffic impact analysis and we don't plan for traffic anymore. It means that the city plays a bigger part in it from the outset, and we understand that, as we're required to by state law, that our transportation system can support the planned densities that we are looking at for these areas. Because of that, we're coordinating very closely with the transportation system plan update that's happening. Then we also look at exploring the feasibility of some new incentive tools. And so we talk about a feasibility study for the formation of a compact urban development district to help reduce those financial and regulatory obstacles. We have another suggestion of completing an assessment of implementing variable expertise. A little clarification about this one. Doesn't mean that development on the outskirts of the city pays more than its fair share to subsidize SDCs in the core of the making sure that we understand the true infrastructure costs of these developments and that we're not charging more of a development that maybe actually has less cost at the end. So kind of looking at those true costs and making sure that they match up and just doing an assessment to see where we are with that. And then there are other incentives such as tax incentives, loan programs, public infrastructure improvements, place-making improvements. Those include things like wider sidewalks, street trees, benches, things that kind of help people feel comfortable in the space and can really motivate from private investment in an area. So, and then also understanding better what the appropriate implementation tools are that help to facilitate this development as well. And just a few words about this strategy in general. Without addressing these barriers that currently exist and are real, then these plans that we're making are really just aspirational. And if we have aspirational plans, then we run the risk of creating what has been kind of learned is called phantom capacity, where we say that we're going to be able to provide for all these things that we need, but if we don't do the things we need to do, then we actually aren't planning for them. So this is an important strategy, and I think we can take questions about that. Sure,
Just to give you an idea of sort of thinking outside the box that happened in some of the CRG's breakout sections I was in, traffic impact analysis quite often are very expensive, and a lot of times it's the first developer through the door that has to pay a big chunk of it, and then it benefits everybody behind it. One of the discussions was that if the city's looking to create compact density in areas, that maybe the city actually institutes the traffic impact analysis, and then as development occurs, that portion of that is paid back to the city over time as development occurs, so that the first person through doesn't have to pay for it. The other discussion is to think about having FDCs be back-end loaded so you don't have to pay for it the day you start construction, because I don't get the income for a year or 2 years down the road. Let me pay for it at the time that I actually start getting income from a project. Things like that can help actually foster a lot more development. It's just sort of some of the things that going on at CRG.
Just a sort of a comment that goes maybe in the other direction from this. When we're talking about what we need to actually put in place to make things, to try to facilitate things happening where we want them to happen, I'd also bring up the other thing about intentionality about what we're trying to preserve, and that you actually have actions, not just phantom concepts about what you're trying to preserve too, because I can't see how we're going to keep some of our neighborhoods being what we want them to be unless we look for the same kind of intentionality about what we allow to happen in those neighborhoods. I just want to sort of push out the other side of that a little bit.
Under the second point here, it says, we talk about a compact urban development district and explore options for administering and financing the district. To me, that sounds an awful lot like an urban renewal district. And I don't have to tell anyone that's been pretty controversial in the past. And, is this like one district that would administer all of the different areas where we want to encourage development, or is it a whole series of many districts, each with their own administration? And so why not just address that first?
I would think those are the kinds of questions that would get answered as part of doing the feasibility assessment to find out what kinds of things would make sense. Would it be area-specific kinds of things and for certain districts? So the strategy is to conduct the assessment. It doesn't really presuppose any particular outcome.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just concerned about when I see this part of financing the district. That's like, opponents, one of their main objections is that it takes money out of the general fund, which could go for schools, the whole list of things that the general fund pays for. So it just seems like deja vu all over again here. We're getting set for that. So.
What I think financing, you talk about
that's come up several times in my area of town. It seems inherently unfair that the first person in the door has to pay for that entire thing. It should be paid for by all of the development. But problem with that idea of having the city pay for it is where do you get the money to pay for it in the first place, and then how much do you get back and when, and how many years does it take, and how do you know what each share is when you don't know what the development is. So there's a lot of stuff that has to work around that. But I do get nervous when we talk about eliminating traffic impact analysis or reduced parking requirements in the context of livability of neighborhoods. The biggest issues I think people have in livability are traffic and parking, especially in those areas of transition between commercial and residential, and also with densification, the reduced parking requirement, that just puts, it's not, I like the concept of it, but it's not necessarily so that if we reduce the parking, they don't bring their cars. In my part of town, they still bring the cars, and we just have less parking, and that's very problematic. So that directly impacts livability of a neighborhood. So I think we need to tread very carefully in that area and be very specific about what we're doing, and not have unintended consequences of it, because I think we have had unintended consequences of it, especially in the SUNY neighborhood. Is a good example of that.
I was going to respond to that one in particular. I think that the goal there is not so much eliminating it, the need for traffic impact. I mean, eliminating it as a tool, because it really is a necessary thing to understand what impacts are. I think it's a transfer from being sort of a site-specific burden on a particular developer and keeping that development moving forward and being more of a proactive. How do we meet our city transportation needs? How do we meet transportation needs in a particular area, and doing it in a more proactive way? What can the city do to help facilitate that so that it doesn't become the one thing standing between somebody and their development moving forward?
Yeah, there are. Well, I would suggest then that you consider changing your wording here. It does say eliminate the requirement too, and maybe what you mean to say from what you just said is that transform the way that TIAs are done and financed, as opposed to eliminating the requirement for it, because you're still going to have that requirement. It's just a matter of how it gets done. Good, that's good clarification. I like the idea of the compact urban development districts and creative ways of financing them that don't necessarily involve tax increment financing. On the next page, the complete assessment of variable SDCs. I kind of look at SDCs as zero sum. So if we're going to reduce SDCs in areas because they're in a more compact or more densely developed area because they do have lower costs, then that means other places need to absorb that reduction by having increases. So to me, it seems like a zero-sum game.
Generally, I would agree with that. I think SDCs are, you have to have so much money to put in a piece of infrastructure, and then it's how you distribute that cost in a fair way and distribute it based on actual impact on it. I think what this really talks about is ensuring that the SDCs are allocated in a way that is more refined based on actual impact. So in that case, if I pay a little bit less for a $100 piece of infrastructure, maybe Mike has to pay a little bit more because he has to distribute the cost.
And I'm sure he'd gladly do that.
Right. Always. But the intent really is, and part of it is to really assess that, because part of the intuitive piece of that says that in some of these already developed areas, you don't have as much impact, or you don't have as much infrastructure put in, so you're already not needing to pay as much as some place where the infrastructure is there. So that's intuitively part of this is let's assess that and implement it in the next.
Yeah, I like that thinking. It kind of goes into the next two bullets, which is the incentives and the implementation tools. I think we need to start thinking about new ways to do this, being creative and come up with a little bit out-of-the-box thinking about how we can make these things that we want to try to occur. Those are going to be really critical. And we're not going to see them in March, but over the next year or two, I think developing those are going to be really important in order so we don't create phantom capacity where we said, oh yeah, we were going to do that, but we didn't really end up doing.
Okay, so we still have 3 people in the queue, so I'm going to move on, and then we'll have clarifications as we come back around. That's all right. Councilor Clark.
Yeah, this is the really interesting part of the discussion for me here, because this is kind of the nexus of all of these points. I think it's interesting. For me, as Alan said, it is a zero sum for me as well, in the sense that when you're talking about these kind of increased densities, I think there are infrastructure needs that we don't always take into the same kind of consideration, several of which are, say, under the ground. We've seen some of the things that happen downtown when we have excess demand on infrastructure pieces. It's not the same thing as parks and transportation, but it's the sewers and different things that are going to have higher needs, and the rebuilding costs may not be less than putting in new. So I think you're right that we should tread lightly with that. However, another interesting nexus of this is that we're talking about intentionally creating walkable 20-minute neighborhoods. And I think Alan's right, though, just because you say you want to create a neighborhood that's less dependent on automobiles doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't going to drive there and just have less places to park. So I think it's incumbent on us to be careful about how we approach that. I'm in favor of the idea of what you suggested with regard to TIAs, but for different reasons. I've seen that as a tool by which phantom capacity always becomes the case. We talk about how we want to have a particular density, or we have a particular area zone to be able to redevelop, but then when the owner actually has to pay for the TIA, they find out they can't do it without exorbitant costs that make it impractical or unaffordable to actually do. So I think knowing our capacities up front and knowing what the impacts are going to be for what we're planning up front, and then asking folks that actually do that work, we're taking the responsibility off of them and putting it where it should be, in my mind, with the public, because we're asking for a particular density. Lastly, I thought the mayor and Commissioner Duncan hit on something too that's important with regard to variable SDCs. Are we considering the collection rate as a variable portion of that as well? In other words, when, as Commissioner Duncan mentioned, when specific things can be charged as opposed to all up front, doing it over the capacity and time? Because that's kind of a takeoff or a change in current policy. And I know that there are a couple of bills before the legislature looking at that as well. So I'm interested to know that we're in favor of that.
I think that would all be part of that removing financial barriers. That's really a financial barrier, is the timing of the payment of SDCs, right? So I would say yes, that's all part of the discussion and analysis of that.
Okay.
Good.
Councilor Farr.
Thank you. I was going to ask you, as a point of order from now on, put me in the queue ahead of Councilor Blanca. Because he said everything I was going to say. But then he started dealing.
I'll just defer to Pat before I talk.
Thank you. Maybe we should sit beside each other.
Yeah, we could say every other word.
Councilor Brown, you had mentioned that the compact urban development district does look like an urban renewal district, and it does. But I think wrapping what Commissioner Duncan said regarding different ways to incent people for developing that aren't necessarily tax increment financing, I think that it's really attractive. It could work, providing we can, as you had mentioned, Alan, find a way to pay for it. And I'm sure there are mechanisms out there to pay for it, so that the developer doesn't bear the burden of the cost. And the other thing I would like to say is that urban renewal districts, while they have been controversial from time to time, they've also been very, very successful. Eugene, I can point to a number of them that have done exactly what they were intended to do. Thank you.
Commissioner Byerly.
There are a few things that people have mentioned already that are sort of synthesizing ideas for me, and sort of as it relates to urban renewal and also what Mayor Piercy said about what we want to preserve. It seems that a lot of what is uncomfortable about urban renewal is where we haven't been mindful of the things, our cultural resources particularly, that we wanted to protect in the past. And as I'm reading through this, there are a number of places where I feel like we don't really have language in this to look at our cultural resources, but number one, I'm not sure Eugene really has figured out its own identity around them, particularly because everybody's like, well, all the old buildings got knocked down and then we got this modern era stuff that nobody really seems to like, but somehow that's our identity and do we want to protect it? So, I do have a little bit of concern reading through some of this, though, that we're not making any allowances to protect that weird authenticity about Eugene, though, and that in the encouragement to redevelop, we create a whole something new that maybe we like and maybe we don't like. But I think part of what's important for a vibrant Eugene, however we think about that, is have the mix of kind of the good, bad, and the ugly all together, and to really think about that in terms of our transitions, the residential and commercial together in a certain kind of form makes a lot of sense, and other things like that. So I did actually have some sort of preservation something listed on here, but that's sort of a general comment about these things that I thought I would chime in, because it doesn't look like we're going to get beyond.
I have a comment about SBCs, and I think Councilor Clark started to agree with me.
It's happening over and over and over. You need to stop hitting each other.
Like that. Someone said if the infrastructure is already there, maybe they should pay less than SBCs. And I think you mentioned that there are things that you don't see. If you bring in more people, they don't just use the infrastructure that's right there in their block. They use the whole city. So I don't think that makes sense to say if your infrastructure is right there, you don't need to do something. Just the sewers and the water lines. There's more demand on those because you have more dense population. And as for delaying the SDCs, I see a point to that, but what if someone starts a big project and they haven't made any SDCs and then they abandon it? Like Astor's Home over there.
There's no demand on the system.
They've left something that has to be cleaned up. They cost a lot of money.
So I'll just have you just move to the last two items and... Okay. Yeah, these last two items are pretty quick, actually. Number 5 is really about conducting a pilot project to implement everything that we've been talking about with the pillar. And it is really, what it's doing is putting these practices to work in a timely manner. So we could probably study them and plan for them for years and years and years, but it's really wanting to get something on the ground and to, as we say here, to demonstrate how builders, neighbors, and the city can come together to foster best outcomes and recognize the positive benefits of certain types of development. So this is really just trying to get something on the ground and putting these ideas to action. Like?
Is there anything that's out there or
Example? Who's a lucky neighbor? Lucky builder, lucky neighbor.
I guess you don't know the exact answer to that.
So what are larger?
So,
Well, you could say that what we're doing in South Atlanta is actually a pilot project of area planning for that portion of the city. So that's one area that we are already making progress. But that's not going to be the only pilot project. There's a number of things that have to this year, so more to come. The sixth strategy is important. It's something that we've heard again and again, that as we are talking about densifying certain parts of our city, we better make sure that we have the parks and open space infrastructure, so to speak, that they need. And so there's just a high value in this community about providing parks and open space for
desirability of this area. And so we need to look at those areas as they begin to densify and determine if we do have adequate parkland in those areas. So this is kind of continuing that assessment and
I wonder, this one doesn't have any, what I see, like really measurable things attached to it, and yeah. And I'm wondering if maybe I'm not seeing it, but I have some questions about it too. So, if the street becomes a lively place, does that count? Or is it local access to green spaces, not necessarily parks? So, you know, if you have a grassy patch, does that count? Or trying to figure out, you know, does it mean access to gardening? Would container gardens count? Other things like that. Do trees count? Whether, you know, if we're looking down, or what counts? And then also sort of curious what the purpose of parks and for commercial areas and corridors are.
I think those are all excellent questions, and I think we want to look at those as part of the assessment. From my background, the purpose of parks and green areas, they can be defined in a number of different ways. Generally, in the city of Eugene, we want a neighborhood park within walking distance of all residences. The neighborhood park is kind of at its simplest, a playground. And so are there areas for children that may be living in this area to you know, access a play area that could be provided in some instances in a private location, or do we need more public spaces for that to happen? So those are good questions that you're asking.
And I guess mostly what I was thinking about was Olmsted and this idea of the parkway as a place where you can rejuvenate your mental and emotional, you know, capacity or feeling. And so I was wondering if things like a parkway would count, if that's what the purpose of the park was. Certainly there would be a need for kids, I understand that, but I was sort of curious about that.
Well, and then also urban plaza, and so, you know, that sort of a perfect function.
And if I just add on to it, remember part of what the whole purpose of part of this pillar is was neighborhoods. What we're trying to do is create what we call mixed-use neighborhoods. And so it's sort of the whole feel. While we're trying to do more compact urban development, what we also want to do is create a livable place for that, in which you're actually creating a bit of a neighborhood. You're actually that's part of what I think the purpose of the park is. Whatever kind of park it is, to create that community.
Thank you. Just two comments. One on pilot projects. And just a reminder that it is just a pilot project. It's not the only project that is going to be using that same language. Which this has been a bit of confusion in some of the economic development things regarding pilot projects versus ongoing projects. But as far as the scale of the pilot project or of projects down the road, it doesn't necessarily need to be a large project. And for instance, I mentioned Irwin and Barger, which is unused commercial land there. A lot of residential, old and new residential, and a lot of opportunity for a 20-minute neighborhood that services a really large population. Put that in perspective, it's about 2 blocks west of the Bethel Fire Station. That general area in there, where there is a Dairy Mart store, there's a new little restaurant there, an old store, very old houses. When I say very old, you know, 1940s era houses. And there are also 2010 era houses right in that same area. So there's a lot of potential for small-scale mixed use. Not necessarily the initial pilot project, but it doesn't have to be the larger scale that people tend to think of when we talk about the project.
Yep, Councilor Lincoln.
Oh, Pat said exactly what I was going to say.
We can leave those.
But I did have another comment. The West University neighborhood is a good example of additional parks, even though it has the great addition of the West University, the new park there, and it's a beautiful park. What I hear from folks in there is that it feels closed in, there's not enough of it because it's more dense than almost any other neighborhood, and so it doesn't have these open spaces. They're not integrated enough into the space, and people flow out of the houses, and they don't have a place to go. So that's a good example of it. And one of the things we talk about in the Walnut Station is having urban spaces in a more densified that are kind of hardscape, but they also provide the same kind of atmosphere. They might have planters with trees in them, and they're not, flowing green hills, but they still provide sort of that same kind of feel to it. And I really like that idea, incorporating more of it into the structures and the buildings and the way that we're doing buildings, as opposed to just saying, okay, we need a park here and we need a park here. I think integrating into the design will help a lot.
Yeah, Commissioner Belcher and Mayor Person.
Well, I just wanted to bring you back to the title of this pillar, which is promote compact urban development and efficient transportation options. I know we're not Portland, but Portland's experience has been that when they increase the opportunity for multimodal rapid transit, they get increased density. So without the appearance of looking like I'm giving testimony a few hours late, I just
And it's all good.
just saying.
I just wanted to actually just hook on a little bit to what Alan said, in that I think you have to think about, and I think you all know this, you think of the multiple things you're trying to accomplish at the same time. So in my view, we have a problem in the West University neighborhood of no place for people to go except out to the street. And so you really have to think about how open space and landscape creates places for people to be where you want them to be as opposed to where you don't want them to be. So it has to do with the livability of the neighborhood as well as that kind of feeling of space and park space. So just to add to that.
We just turned 14th and Mill into a park.
Well, I just think every time it has to be integrated into everything that's being built with that in mind, because otherwise you have an awful lot of people with no good place to be.
My pilot.
Councilor Price.
What's interesting about this, it gets back to the notion of intentionality, is I can remember reading an article in, I believe it was an 1868 version of Engineering Monthly, during the design of Central Park. And the very exact same discussion that we're having right now occurred in 1868 because they were being intentional about Manhattan Island was developing at a very rapid pace and was becoming very intensely developed. Residentially, commercially, buildings were going up. And they were saying we've got to have this kind of development within that overall structure or else it's going to be a bad thing. So they approached it in a very intentional way. I think that's what's important about this conversation is you don't let this happen haphazardly. If you're going to be looking at commercial and intense development, you've actually got to have that conversation at this point rather than later on when you won't have the space, you won't have the ability, you won't have the infrastructure to do it. They were very smart. I can't imagine Manhattan Island without it. It would be a very different place. And so by getting ahead of that conversation, we're actually being very smart, almost as smart as everybody else.
You don't look that old.
They were planning. There was no.
Any last comments on this story before I hand it back over to Lisa?
I have my best outcome of getting through 3 or 4 pillars. My worst fears are now it's going to take 5 to 10 word sessions. So why don't we move on to page 8, which is protect, repair, and enhance neighborhood livability. And I'll be some high-level things about this, and we may end up continuing this conversation next week. Jason's going to change up the board up here. So,
Anybody want to buy a foul? No, man.
I was refraining from making that comment. I thought it would be inappropriate.
What if it's from you?
It's all good.
Maybe a listen, you should come back.
I was going to say that.
Livability really emerged as a common thread throughout all the pillars and strategies that we talked about, but really was elevated to its own pillar level just because of the extreme value. And I would say that it emerged not just as a value through the community resource group process, but also through the many neighborhood listening sessions that we held, individual interviews, public open houses. It's clearly one of our community's strongest held values. It should have a prominent place in our proposal. So building on the work of the community resource group, this pillar really emphasizes the characteristics that we hold most dear about what makes Eugene such a tremendously livable place, and a place that we all want to live in, work in, play, recreate. Each neighborhood in our community has a very different feel, very unique characteristics, and they're unique to folks that live there, and they, as many of the issues that Carolyn talked about, they require different approaches in trying to preserve and enhance them. So this pillar recognizes that as we grow and change as a community, we need to build on the things that we value, and then we need to make sure that any new development happens not just respects, but also enhances those livability qualities. Over the past 15 years or so, we've done quite a bit of work in terms of trying to be efficient in our land use and increase our density. We're actually quite ahead of many other communities in terms of what we've already done as far as code amendments along those lines. We've further our growth management policies and some of those updates. We've also had some unintended consequences of creating some infills without the benefit of specific tools to help protect our neighborhoods. So I think really just making sure that we can create area-specific design tools and process mechanisms to assure livable neighborhoods is at the core of this pillar. The first strategy under this pillar is to maintain currently allowed densities in our code. Strategies to add densities would only be allowed through a community process that supports the goals and outcomes of and recommendations of the infill compatibility planning process. Carrie and I are going to tag team here a little bit. I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit more about infill compatibility, what we've done so far, where we think we're going, and also talk about the opportunity siting, and hopefully we'll answer your questions from previously, Councilor Taylor.
Great. So, as you all know, ICS and OS, Infill Compatibility Standards and Opportunity Siting, were initiated as companion strategies by the City Council back in 2006, and so they take a pretty prominent place in this proposal to continue the work of the task teams and the community members that worked on those over the years. So Strategy 2 really talks about what is left to do on ICS. Back at the end of 2009, the Council adopted the first 4 recommendations, and we've already talked about some of those here. The building height and parking regulations, special area zone for parts of Jefferson West Side, and then we actually reduced parking requirements for subsidized housing as part of those amendments as well. The next set of recommendations that are in the queue relate to single-family infill citywide, and so that's a great thing because a great portion of our city is zoned R1 and will have the benefit of better design compatibility standards relating to flag lots, encouraging secondary dwelling units and alley-front lots with some additional standards, and then also reducing barriers to small-scale infill, such as by scaling SCCs to the size of the proposed home. So there are additionally more recommendations from the ICS list that need further work to implement, and they include better tools for conservation areas in new subdivisions, improved tools for promoting cluster development, some improvements to our process in terms of pre-applications and application review, and then focusing more on incentives for natural resource protection above what our code already requires. And lastly, some changes to multifamily standards that became evident during the task team's work. So that's sort of the ICS. So I'll move on to describe the opportunity siting strategy unless you want to stop on ICS.
I actually had a little thing about point 1.
Okay.
I'm sure that there's a reason why it says do not to start off with, but I find that such a negative way to begin, and even as you were describing it, you said maintain. And so I wonder if there's another word that we can use to start that off, like
Protect.
Or something like
Never.
that.
Absolutely.
Say it in a positive way, right? What you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Come at it from the positive.
Yeah.
Protect the current density.
Or you can guarantee, or whatever it is that is strong enough.
I'm going to just let her get through the rest of the
I was doing through the community group, if I would agree that I heard the discussion about not above those allowed existing regulations, I think I kind of heard more sort of protect where we are, maintain where we are, with sort of the caveat in there that there are places that neighborhoods would see some allowed increase. As an example, I believe R1 right now allows 10 units per acre, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm going to guess you can't find an R1 neighborhood in the city, other than a few, where you're at 10 units per acre right now. So I'm not sure that I heard it allowed under existing regulations. I think I heard more sort of what exists now on the ground, with some caveats that yes, some increased density could occur in some locations within neighborhoods. So I'm not sure that I would agree with that statement of what I heard sort of out of the CRG.
Well, I guess I would just emphasize that I think the key takeaway from that strategy, particularly for those of you who weren't involved in SCRG, is that you're not looking at a strategy that assigns additional densities to the neighborhoods. We're not trying to meet our density goals through loading up in our neighborhoods. I think trying to emphasize that point is really, and so maybe we can look at the wording of that, but just to make sure that that's really what we're trying to communicate.
That I agree with. Yeah.
And they actually exist.
Right. In our current code.
Because there's a real disconnect. I mean, Suna was a great example. It's actually the code allowed R4 there,
right.
But nobody in the neighborhood would have said, "Oh yeah, that would be fine because the code was there." Nobody knew. People don't really know what the codes are, so they see their neighborhood as the way they see their neighborhood now, and they like it, and they want to protect that, and they don't really know or care what the density is in that particular lot because it has a different zoning to it.
And I guess that's really
nobody looks at zoning maps.
The emphasis is the work of ICS.
Yeah. Okay. So
For developers.
I just want to point out we only have 4 minutes left in this meeting, and then we're going to need to come
I shouldn't get into the next item, I don't think.
Right. So I just want to wrap this up, and if we have any closing comments, you can put that in there.
I just want to say that this is really great. I see this as one of the key pillars of the whole thing, and I'm really glad that all these strategies and tactics are mapped out in this detail. And good work. Thank you. When our focus group talked about this in CRG, I think we came up with the fact that these are all pillars, and a very wise group in 1998 wrote those growth management policies, and one of the challenges that those have provided is that some people and some groups have pointed to this policy or that policy as the ultimate one that we have to follow, and our group decided that we thought it was important to say, for this building to stand, all pillars have to be equally considered, and not one is any taller than the other.
Not this building.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
That's kind of a way of saying the same thing that Rick did, I think.
Other questions on that idea? So I guess I'm not to step on your toes here, Sarah, but I'm thinking that maybe what we'll do is come back next time. We'll start out with the opportunity citing, and then continue through the remainder vulnerability, and then we're going to do natural resources, and then go to the other economic development, climate, energy action plan, and housing. So, any last comments? All right, thank you guys.
So I just want to wrap it up and say thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again real soon. And I also, because I didn't do it at the front of the meeting, so before I gavel the city council out, I wore purple today, and there are other purples in the room, and I just want to take a moment of this meeting to recognize the huge loss we have in our community of 2 young people who died and their families and their school. And I know we all share that loss and we all share that sadness for all of them, but I didn't want the day to go by. It's the first meeting we've had since that occurred, and I didn't want the day to go by without expressing on behalf, I think, of all of us, our deep compassion for the families and all of our best hopes and wishes. So I just wanted to get that in before we called an end to the meeting at the Gavel City Council.
And gavel up the Eugene Planning Commission. That's a gavel, not Mac.
Thanks.
Your gavel.